Most people live their lives begging for respect, wondering why others overlook them, challenge them, or manipulate them. Today, we solve that weakness. I will show you 7 dark traits, subtle, psychological weapons that make people fear crossing you, fear betraying you, and fear underestimating you ever again. When we speak of fear, most people imagine cruelty, violence, or ruthlessness. But fear, in its purest and most strategic form, is none of those things. Fear is a psychological instrument, a silent force that shapes human behavior more reliably than kindness ever could. If you wish to understand power, you must first understand fear, because power does not grow from charm or goodwill. It grows from consequence, and those who master consequence master the world around them. Look at the nature of people. They are inconsistent, emotional, and often motivated by their own advantage. If they can take from you without consequence, they will. If they can disrespect you without repercussion, they will. And if they can deceive you without fearing discovery, they certainly will. This is not pessimism. It is human reality. And the one who acknowledges this reality gains an advantage over those who blindly believe the world rewards benevolence alone. To understand power through fear, you must begin with a simple truth. Human beings obey what they fear losing, not what they love, not what they admire. They obey what can punish them, expose them, or remove something they need. When you understand this truth, you no longer attempt to win people with softness. You instead regulate them with boundaries that cannot be crossed. Power built on charm is fragile. Power built on fear is stable, enduring, and predictable. Now, fear should never be the theatrics of rage or brutality. A man who screams is not feared. He is pitied. A man who loses control does not inspire fear. He inspires mockery. True fear comes from poise, from an unshakable presence, from the knowledge that you do not bend and you do not break. People fear the person who remains still when others tremble, who maintains certainty while others doubt, who shows discipline where others show weakness. Fear is born from the contrast between what you are and what others know they are not. Consider the leaders whom history could not erase. They were not remembered because they smiled the most or pleased the most. They were remembered because others were afraid to betray them. Betrayal flourishes where fear is absent. Loyalty, in its highest form, is secured not by affection, but by the silent understanding that disloyalty carries consequences. This is why fear is a pillar of power. It makes betrayal costly, and humans avoid what is costly. When people sense that you tolerate disrespect, they grow bold in the worst way. They test you, they push you. They learn that your boundaries are flexible and your patience is unlimited. And once they learn that, they own you. But when people sense that you have limits, that you enforce them without hesitation, and that crossing them alters the relationship instantly, they behave with caution. Caution is the first sign of respect. Respect is the soil from which fear grows. Fear also arises from unpredictability. The more predictable you are, the more easily others calculate how far they can push you. When they know exactly how you will respond, they fear you less. But when they cannot read your next move, when your silence holds more weight than your words, when they sense an internal strength they cannot measure, they begin to fear misjudging you. And nothing intimidates people more than the possibility of miscalculation. Those who understand fear do not use it to dominate the innocent. They use it to protect themselves from the disloyal, the manipulative, and the cunning. Fear neutralizes threats before they form. Fear establishes boundaries without raising your voice. Fear ensures that even in your absence, your presence is remembered. And when your presence is remembered, Your power travels further than your footsteps ever will if you wish to understand influence, true influence. The kind that shapes the minds and behavior of others. You must understand perception. Power does not come from what you are. It comes from what others believe you are. And this belief is molded not by your intentions, but by your traits, especially the darker ones that most people fear acknowledging within themselves. These traits, when used with precision, do not make you evil, they make you effective. Every human you encounter judges you instantly, instinctively, and often unfairly. They do not analyze your virtues or your achievements. They scan for weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and openings. In this world, perception is the first battlefield. And those who understand how dark traits influence that perception become invisible commanders of the room they enter. It begins the moment you walk in. People sense your presence before they understand it. Their minds search for signals: strength, instability, authority, insecurity. And what they perceive becomes the reality they respond to. A controlled, restrained darkness within you unsettles people because it suggests depth. It suggests you are not as easily read as the average person, not as predictable, not as harmless. And nothing creates fear faster than the realization that someone cannot be mapped, measured, or manipulated. When your expression is unreadable, when your reactions are scarce, when your emotions appear selectively displayed, others grow uncertain. Uncertainty is the birthplace of fear, and fear is the birthplace of respect. Dark traits such as emotional detachment, decisiveness, and firm boundaries alter the way people interpret your character. They sense you do not cling, you do not plead, you do not seek approval. This unsettles them because most individuals rely on emotional dependency to gain leverage. When they cannot influence you through guilt, sympathy, or flattery, they lose their favorite tools. Their only remaining response is caution. And within that caution, you gain psychological territory. Consider the trait of controlled unpredictability, not the chaos of an unstable mind, but the calculated unpredictability of someone who chooses their actions with intention. When you are not overly explainable, when you respond differently than expected without losing composure, it shakes people. They begin to realize that you operate on a logic they cannot decipher. And when someone cannot predict your moves, they assume you are capable of outcomes they cannot prepare for. This assumption is where fear grows. Another dark trait that shapes perception is your willingness to enforce boundaries without emotional theatrics. Most people hesitate out of fear of social disapproval. You, however, act from principle. When you enforce a standard calmly and without apology, it signals that your self-respect is non-negotiable. People do not fear a boundary. They fear the person who upholds it with unwavering certainty. This creates an image of someone who cannot be pushed, someone who cannot be controlled, someone whose tolerance has a defined limit. Even the way you communicate can embody these darker traits. Those who speak with precision few words, but the right ones, appear more intelligent and more dangerous. Rambling reveals insecurity. Silence reveals strength. And when people cannot interpret your silence, they fill it with assumptions shaped by their own fears. Their mind becomes your ally, doing the work for you. Your presence becomes a mirror reflecting people's insecurities back at them. They do not fear you because you are cruel. They fear you because your traits expose what they wish to hide. Your discipline makes them aware of their instability. Your emotional control highlights their impulsiveness. Your decisiveness underscores their hesitation. Your lack of need reveals their dependence. This is the essence of shaping perception with darker traits. You do not intimidate people by force. You intimidate them by contrast, by being what they cannot easily understand, by displaying what they lack, by becoming a figure they cannot categorize into the ordinary. A person who carries darkness with elegance becomes someone others approach carefully, speak to cautiously, and think about long after the conversation has ended. There is a misconception that power requires force, aggression, or physical dominance. The truth is far more subtle. Real power requires none of these things. Real power is presence, a presence that is felt, not announced, a presence that quiets a room without a raised voice, a presence that makes people think twice before disrespecting you, not because you threaten them, but because your very demeanor tells them you cannot be taken lightly. This is how you master influence without lifting a hand or raising your tone. Understand this. Violence is the tool of the desperate. Intimidation through chaos is the practice of the weak. But psychological authority, the kind of presence that makes people fear disappointing you, fear challenging you, fear underestimating you, is the domain of the disciplined. It is built on internal strength, not external displays. People do not fear the loud man. They fear the one who remains composed, unshaken, and fully aware of his own power. Mastering presence begins with the way you occupy space. You do not rush. You do not fidget. You do not reveal anxiety. Your movements are intentional, minimal, and controlled. When you move with purpose, people subconsciously perceive you as someone who knows where he is going, who knows what he is doing, and who does not need anyone's approval to exist. This is not arrogance. It is sovereignty, and sovereignty is intimidating. Your eyes reveal more than your words. Most people scatter their attention, looking everywhere, seeking approval, searching for acceptance. But when you hold eye contact with calm confidence, not aggression, but certainty, you communicate something different. You communicate that you see people clearly, that you evaluate them, that you are not distracted or overwhelmed. People fear being seen too deeply, and those who fear being seen become careful around the one who can see them. Another pillar of presence is emotional restraint. When something irritates you, you do not react. When someone tests you, you do not break. People who cannot control their emotions are slaves to the people who can manipulate them. But when you remain steady, others recognize that emotional influence does not work on you. The person who cannot be emotionally influenced becomes the hardest to deceive, the hardest to manipulate, and therefore the one others fear trying to outmaneuver. Your voice is also part of this presence. You speak slowly, clearly, and without rushing to fill silence. Silence is one of your greatest tools. Most people fear silence. They scramble to break it because it exposes their insecurity. But when you embrace silence, when you allow it to sit comfortably, people lean in. They anticipate what you will say next. You control the rhythm of the conversation simply by refusing to be driven by nervous impulses. This creates an atmosphere where others instinctively respect your pace. Presence is also built by the boundaries you uphold. You do not explain your standards. You do not negotiate your values. You do not justify your limits. When you say no, it remains no. When someone crosses a line, you withdraw your energy, your attention, or your access. There is nothing louder than a silent consequence. People fear the rejection of someone whose approval they cannot easily earn. They fear losing what feels stable, disciplined, and grounded. To master presence without violence is to become the person who does not chase, does not cling, and does not beg. You are not easily impressed. You are not easily rattled. You are not easily persuaded. This makes others treat you with seriousness. People reserve fear for those who operate beyond ordinary emotion and beyond the need for validation. Violence may command obedience for a moment, But presence, true presence, commands respect long before a conflict ever begins. Presence is the quiet power that alters the room the second you enter, the force that makes people straighten their posture, choose their words more carefully, and approach you with a level of caution reserved only for those they cannot afford to underestimate. Fear, when mastered, does not isolate you. It elevates you. Most people misunderstand the nature of fear, imagining it as a force that destroys relationships or invites hostility. But fear, used correctly, becomes influence. It becomes a shield that protects your boundaries, a sword that eliminates manipulation, and a silent authority that commands respect without demanding it. You do not use fear to push people away. You use it to ensure that only the right ones come close. Influence begins the moment people understand that their actions toward you have consequences. Not dramatic consequences, not explosive reactions, but the simple certainty that crossing you alters the dynamic instantly. Human beings are instinctively cautious around anyone whose boundaries are firm and whose tolerance is limited. When people know that disrespect results in distance, that deceit results in disconnection, and that inconsistency results in exclusion, they behave differently. They choose their words with care. They consider their actions more thoughtfully. They become more deliberate, not out of love, but out of fear of losing access to your presence. This is the foundation of influence. Influence is not about control. It is about shaping how others treat you. You do not influence by asking. You influence by signaling that you are not afraid to walk away. People fear losing what is rare, and nothing is rarer than someone who refuses to tolerate disrespect. When you hold this standard, you attract loyalty, not because you demand it, but because people fear the emptiness created by your absence. Fear transforms into influence when you make your silence more powerful than other people's noise. Instead of arguing, you withdraw. Instead of pleading, you disregard. Instead of fighting for someone's understanding, you allow your lack of interest to deliver the message. Your silence becomes a consequence, and consequences shape behavior. Those who care will correct themselves. Those who do not reveal themselves. Either outcome serves you. This is why silence is feared. It exposes truth without a single word. Influence also grows from the discipline of emotional neutrality. When people realize that emotional manipulation does not work on you, they stop trying. When guilt fails, when flattery fails, when pressure fails, they begin to adjust their behavior not because you forced them to, but because their usual tactics died in your presence. This is how fear subtly shifts into influence. People stop trying to change you and instead begin changing themselves. Do not overlook how consistency reinforces this effect. A person who enforces boundaries one day and abandons them the next becomes predictable, and predictability kills influence. But a person whose standards remain firm over time becomes someone others approach with caution and respect. Influence is not built through a single action. It is built through patterns that people learn not to test. When they know you are unwavering, they adjust permanently. This adjustment is the truest form of influence. You shape behavior without speaking. Another element of turning fear into influence is unpredictability, not in your morals or values, but in your responses. When others cannot calculate exactly how you will react, they treat you with greater seriousness, not because they fear the worst, but because they do not assume the best. You become a variable they cannot easily manipulate, a presence that cannot be casually handled. Influence grows when people know you have the capacity to surprise them, not with aggression, but with decisive action. At the heart of all this lies a simple principle. Influence requires distance, not physical distance, but psychological distance. The moment people feel entitled to your time, attention, or loyalty, they lose fear, and with fear goes respect. But when you maintain an aura of independence, when you are connected but not dependent, present but not available to everyone, you create a sense of value around your presence. And value breeds influence. Fear becomes influence the moment people realize they cannot afford to lose your respect, your loyalty, or your approval. Not because you threaten them, but because your absence costs them more than your presence. Power is never granted freely. It is crafted through presence, discipline, and the silent force of consequence. Those who understand human nature know that respect does not grow from kindness alone. It grows from boundaries, from unpredictability, from emotional mastery, from the ability to carry darkness with elegance rather than chaos. When fear is used not to harm but to guide behavior, it becomes influence. When influence is shaped by restraint instead of aggression, it becomes authority. And when authority is grounded in understanding rather than cruelty, it becomes unshakable. In this world, it is not the loud, the violent, or the impulsive who rise. It is the composed, the unreadable, the principled, the ones who do not beg for respect, but command it through the gravity of their presence. The ones who cannot be manipulated, cannot be rushed, and cannot be controlled. By mastering these traits, you do not become feared for your brutality. You become feared for your clarity, your strength, and your refusal to bend to the weaknesses that rule others. This is the essence of power as I have observed it, not the power of fists or fury, but the power of the mind, the posture, and the unspoken limits that define you.